When my son, whom I'll call Marcus, looked me directly in the eye and told me I was unwelcome at his house for the holidays, I didn't say a word to contest the decision. I simply managed a small, sad smile, walked out to my old pickup, and made one quick phone call. By the time the calendar flipped to the new year, the automatic payments for their home loan had been cut off. But that was just the very first move in a much bigger strategy one was forming. Their arrogance had grown completely out of hand, and I was absolutely determined to bring things back into a proper balance. What I chose to do in the weeks that followed was something that, honestly, most people would never see coming. I had been trying to set the perfect tone for a relaxing visit. I could prepare the Thanksgiving turkey again this year, I suggested easily, sinking a little deeper into Marcus's expensive, dark leather sofa. The one with the apple and herb dressing that your mother, Sophia, absolutely loved. Do you remember how she used to joke that it was better even than her own grandmother's secret recipe? My words hung awkwardly in the air, mixing with the thick, cloying scent of Clarissa's boutique, overly priced patchouli candles. Marcus shifted slightly next to me, clearly uncomfortable. The bright, glittering lights from the imposing, 12-foot-tall holiday fir tree reflected off his silver wedding band, and I noticed the way his shoulders tensed up, as if he were waiting for me to hit him. He finally let the words out. "Dad, I have to tell you something important. You won't be joining us here for the holiday dinner this year." The sentence felt like a physical blow right to my chest. I blinked hard, entirely convinced I must have misheard him. What exactly do you mean by that? Why on earth would I not be welcome in my own son's house? Marcus kept his eyes glued to the polished granite coffee table, the very one I had helped him select the previous spring when Clarissa announced that their old furniture was not sophisticated enough. "Clarissa's parents are flying in," he mumbled, barely audible. "They would prefer that you not be here." My hands instantly went cold. They would prefer. That is their decision, not yours, I pointed out. It's just less complicated this way, Dad, he said, his voice becoming quieter with every word. You know how her family is about their ancient traditions. They insist on things being done precisely their way. I looked slowly around the living space, taking in every single detail. The heavy velvet drapes I had financed when Clarissa complained about a lack of proper privacy. The stunning hardwood flooring I had purchased using a personal loan secured by my own home. The ornate cornice molding that had completely maxed out my last credit card. Practically every square inch of this residence was linked back to me somehow. My labor, my endless sacrifices, my love for my only son. Their way, I repeated, my tone slow and measured. And what precisely is that way, Marcus? He flinched instantly, as if the very question caused him pain. Dad, please, just don't make this more difficult than it already is. Through the wide kitchen entry, I caught sight of Clarissa's latest extravagant toy, a brand new, professional-grade stand mixer that she absolutely needed for her holiday baking obsession. It was worth nearly $2,500 of my hard-earned money. Sitting there, completely spotless and untouched after maybe 2 uses since October. And where, exactly, am I supposed to spend the holiday dinner then? My voice came out much softer than I had intended, almost sounding broken. Marcus's face twisted in an expression of deep guilt. Perhaps, maybe you could visit Aunt Teresa, or we could just celebrate the following weekend, the weekend after, I echoed, as if the holiday was just another business meeting that could be casually postponed to a more convenient time. I rose slowly to my feet, my knees aching from years of carrying what felt like a heavy burden. I see. Dad. Hold on. Marcus started to protest, but I was already walking toward the entrance. I walked past the framed family photos on the hallway wall, noting how I seemed to fade further and further into the background in each one. I passed the main coat closet, crammed full with Clarissa's collection of over 100 coats. My hand closed around the cold, slick metal of the front doorknob. Without turning back to face him, I spoke. Son, tell Clarissa's parents to have a happy holidays. The frigid December air struck my face the moment I stepped outside. Behind me, Marcus called out my name just once, and then the door closed with a soft, definitive click. I sat for a long moment in my truck, the engine off, staring at the cheerful, glowing lights and the festive windows I was now permanently excluded from. My phone vibrated with an incoming text message. It was almost certainly Marcus, attempting to smooth things over with meaningless, hollow promises. I deliberately ignored it. Instead, I turned the key, the engine grumbling to life, and I pulled away from the home I had paid for, yet was never truly permitted to belong to. The old heater rattled loudly against the biting cold as I drove through the all-too-familiar streets of Oak Creek. The whole town spread out around me. Every block carried a specific memory of the man I used to be. The man who honestly believed that family came first, the kind of man who would give away his last dollar just to ensure his son's happiness. That man was gone now. He had been a complete fool. At the stoplight on 5th and Elm, I watched a young father cheerfully loading oversized gifts into the trunk of his SUV. His young children pressed their excited little faces against the rear windows, fogging up the glass with their anticipation. Once, a long time ago, that had been Daniel and me. Before Clarissa, before I became nothing more than a convenient bank account with feelings no one really cared about. A rush of numbers began to flash in my head, like a broken slot machine. $3,500 every month without fail for 5 straight years. Even my reliable financial calculator had given up when I added it all up last spring. The final total had stopped me dead in my tracks. $210,000. More money than Sophia and I had ever managed to save for our own retirement. Just gone. The light turned green. I hit the accelerator pedal harder than was necessary, the truck engine roaring as if it shared my internal rage. Maple Avenue. That was the bank branch where I had taken out a second mortgage on our home, Sophia's and mine, just to cover their significant down payment. I could still clearly visualize the loan officer's expression. Pity. A look I hadn't understood at the time. "Mr. Perez, are you absolutely certain about this?" she had asked. "You are putting a significant amount on the line for what is essentially someone else's investment. Someone else's investment. Not my son's future. Not my family's security." That banker had been absolutely right. It was never about me. It was always about someone else's investment. Jefferson Avenue. That was the branch where I had secured a second, even larger mortgage when Marcus lost his job 2 years prior. "It's just temporary, Dad," he had promised me then. "Just until I get completely back on my feet." I can still recall Clarissa standing right behind him that day, an expensive $900 designer handbag dangling casually from her arm, nodding as if she actually cared. In reality, she was already mentally calculating how much more my desperation could be ruthlessly exploited for. As it turned out, my desperation had absolutely no value to them. I finally pulled into my own driveway, the one with the broken, cracked concrete I could never afford to fix because every spare cent had been funneled into keeping their perfect, little suburban fantasy alive. The porch light above me flickered weakly. Yet another repair that would just have to wait. The whole house felt hollow without Sophia's genuine laughter, without the simple warmth of family gatherings that I now knew would never return. As I struggled to find the right key, my phone suddenly rang, its piercing tone echoing off the empty walls. Clarissa's name glowed brightly on the screen. She was probably calling to meticulously justify why I was not good enough for her parents' so-called refined taste. Perfect. I had been anticipating this conversation for 5 long, miserable years. I allowed it to ring 3 full times, then answered on the 4th, just to make her briefly wonder if I would pick up at all. "Victor." Clarissa's voice oozed a false, thick sweetness, the same sugary tone she always used right before asking me to cover their enormous property taxes or water bills. "I heard about the little misunderstanding with Marcus." "Misunderstanding?" I countered, leaning heavily against my kitchen counter, still wearing my coat. "There is no misunderstanding, Clarissa. You made yourself completely clear. Look, I know it seems a bit harsh, but you have to try to see it from my parents' perspective," she pressed on. "They are very traditional people. They expect a certain atmosphere during the holidays." "A certain atmosphere," I repeated. "And what kind of atmosphere would that be?" "Exactly. Silence." I could hear the distinct sound of rustling shopping bags in the background, likely filled with items purchased with money that should have gone toward their mortgage. My money. Well, they just aren't accustomed to your specific style of cooking, she finally said. All that spicy Central American food. The music you play. She continued, the venom building up. And Victor, they are educated people. They expect intellectual conversations about classic art, world literature, global current events. The words hit me harder than any slap. 8 years of keeping my mouth shut, of swallowing every petty insult for the sake of my son, of ignoring the contemptuous way she always looked at me, as if I were merely hired help. My kind of cooking, I said calmly and evenly. You mean the home-cooked meals you readily ate every Sunday for 3 years when times were tight? The tamales you swore reminded you of your own grandmother. That was different, she snapped back instantly. We appreciated it then. But now with my parents. Now with your parents. You can't risk having a Mexican peasant embarrass you at your precious dinner table. I finished for her. Her forced sweetness evaporated entirely. Don't be so dramatic, Victor. This isn't about race, she said haughtily. It's about class. My father graduated summa cum laude from Harvard, she bragged. My mother speaks 3 languages fluently. They spend their summers in the Hamptons. What exactly would you contribute to the conversation? Stories about laying flooring? A powerful heat rose within my chest, but I maintained a steady, controlled tone. I built a successful business from absolutely nothing after your husband's grandfather passed away, I informed her. I have employed more than 60 individuals. I've paid more in federal and state taxes than your father earned in his highest earning year. Money isn't everything, Victor. Breeding matters. Education matters, she stated with finality. And frankly, Sophia knew her proper place better than you ever have. The line went completely silent. She had just crossed a personal boundary I hadn't even realized existed until that very second. What did you just say about my wife? I demanded. I'm only saying she knew how to simply blend in, Clarissa answered coolly. She never caused a single bit of trouble. She accepted that certain spaces were just not meant for her. My grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles turned white. Sophia had more genuine class in one finger than your entire family tree combined. I spat out. Oh, please. She was just a maid who got lucky, she scoffed. At least she was smart enough to keep quiet about it. Clarissa, I said, my voice dropping to a tone that was cold and utterly unfamiliar even to my own ears. Listen to me very carefully. This conversation is over. We are done pretending we are a family. You can't just. We are done, I repeated, and I hung up the phone abruptly. I set the phone down carefully on the counter, surprised by how rock-steady my hands were. The kitchen suddenly felt different. Smaller, yes, but somehow lighter, as if a layer of stale air had been forcefully cleared. I walked over to my desk in the corner and pulled out a thick manila envelope I had been deliberately avoiding for months. Inside were all the records. Bank statements, mortgage loan documents, a comprehensive paper trail of my own enormous mistakes. 5 solid years of automatic transfers that had bled me dry while they lived like absolute royalty. It was past time to stop the bleeding entirely. I spread the papers across the table like evidence laid out in a courtroom. Every month told the exact same story. $3,500 gone from my account on the 15th, funneled directly into theirs. The cumulative total was a stark monument to my own foolishness. By the 3rd year, I had stopped buying new clothing. By the 4th, I was shopping exclusively at discount grocery outlets. By the 5th, I was eating simple tuna sandwiches for lunch almost every day just to keep financially afloat. The $210,000 total didn't even account for the initial down payment, or the numerous times I had covered their various utilities when Clarissa's shopping sprees spiraled out of control, or the new roof I paid for, or the extensive landscaping, or the designer furniture they insisted was absolutely essential. I leaned back heavily in my chair and stared at the daunting numbers until they all blurred into nothing. Sophia's life insurance payout, my modest retirement nest egg, even the small college fund we had once started for the grandchildren I might never even meet. Every last bit of it was gone. poured into a home where I wasn't even welcome to share a single holiday meal. I picked up my phone, scrolled through my contacts until I located the number for my bank, and pressed call. A polite automated system answered, offering options in both English and Spanish. How thoughtful, I mused, so welcoming to people like me. Customer service, this is Miranda. How may I help you today? I need to cancel an automatic fund transfer, I stated, my voice feeling steadier than it had in years. Certainly, sir. I'll just require your account number and a few verification details. I rattled them off from memory, listening to the click of her keyboard. She was professional and efficient, with absolutely no trace of judgment in her tone about why an old man was canceling what she surely recognized as his son's home loan payment. I see the transfer, Mr. Perez. $3,500 every month to Capital Bank. Account ending in 8892, she confirmed. It appears you've been making these payments for 5 full years. The number stung, a reminder of the lost time. I confirm, and I'd like to cancel it effective immediately. I glanced around my own kitchen, the ancient stove, the peeling paint, the chill wind slipping through the windows I could never afford to replace because all my money had gone into their dream house. Yes, I stated firmly. Effective immediately. Done. The transfer has been successfully canceled, Miranda announced. Is there anything else I can assist you with today? No, the word came out crisp and clean. Felt better than I could have possibly imagined. No, that's all. I hung up, and a profound silence filled the room. Outside, the darkness was already enveloping Oak Creek. Christmas lights glowed warmly in windows where normal families were gathered without judgment, without conditions. For the first time in 5 years, my own modest budget would finally balance. For the first time since Sophia's death, I could consider fixing the porch light, buying decent groceries, maybe even taking a small, needed trip. I gathered the heavy stack of bank statements and mortgage papers, the physical evidence of how thoroughly I had bled myself dry for them. I carried the whole pile to the fireplace, struck a match and fed the flames. Years of sacrifice burned quickly into ash. The heat on my face felt better than anything I'd experienced in a very long time. My phone buzzed again with a text. Likely Marcus with a clumsy apology, or Clarissa demanding money for something essential like decorative throw pillows. I didn't even bother to look. Instead, I opened the fine bottle of aged scotch I had been saving for a celebration that never came. Tonight was good enough. I poured a generous glass, raised it high toward Sophia's smiling photo on the mantel, and toward the man I used to be, and the man I was now finally becoming. Happy holidays to me, I said aloud, and for once I genuinely meant it. The next morning, the sun broke crisp and bright, a winter light streaming happily through my kitchen windows as I nursed my second, strong cup of coffee. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't running panicked mental calculations about a massive withdrawal that was scheduled to disappear from my account in 3 days. That powerful feeling of freedom tasted even better than the rich, dark Colombian blend I had finally allowed myself to buy. At precisely 10:47 a.m., my phone rang. Clarissa's name glared fiercely on the screen like an angry hazard sign. Victor. Her voice carried that thin, brittle impatience she could never fully hide. I need you to come and pick up my parents from San Francisco International Airport, SFIA. Their flight from Las Vegas is landing at 2:30 this afternoon. I set my heavy mug down with great care, watching the rising steam twist and dissipate. Clarissa, did you happen to forget what we discussed yesterday? Whatever that was, she dismissed briskly. Let's just move on. We need to focus on practical matters now. My parents require a ride, and you're the only one I know who's available during the day. The level of audacity was almost breathtaking, honestly. Less than 24 hours after she had informed me I was not welcome at their holiday table. She was demanding that I act as a personal chauffeur for her entitled family. And why, specifically, are you asking me? I asked quietly. Because that's what family is supposed to do, Victor, she replied, her tone sharpening. They help one another. Besides, let's be honest, you're no kind of rival to me. You are far too weak to ever be my rival. So, Just get into your truck and go pick them up. There it was. The casual, cutting insult neatly tucked inside a direct command. What airline? I asked, maintaining my calm, steady voice. Skyline Airlines Flight 807, she rattled off. They will be waiting at baggage claim carousel B2. And Victor, they are expecting someone who knows how to handle expensive, heavy luggage properly. Do not embarrass us. I could hear the sharp tapping of her manicured nails against a hard surface. Likely the quartz countertop I had paid for when she declared that laminate was beneath her standards. Of course, I said evenly. I'll handle absolutely everything. Good. And wear something respectable. Perhaps that blue jacket you wore to Marcus's college orientation. They notice these kinds of details. The line clicked dead instantly. Not even a grudging thank you. I sat back in my chair, staring blankly at the dark screen. 2:30 p.m. Flight 807. Baggage claim B2. I glanced up at the clock above my sink. 11:05 a.m. Plenty of time, I thought with a grim smile. I poured another cup of coffee, added more sugar than usual, and opened the newspaper to yesterday's crossword puzzle. 7 across. Deferred pleasure, 12 letters. The answer, I knew, would come to me eventually. At 2:35 that same afternoon, I was sitting quite comfortably in my favorite easy chair with a freshly brewed cup of hot English breakfast tea and the thick Sunday edition of the Oak Creek Daily Register. The crossword from the day before rested on the side table, already entirely solved. Deferred pleasure, the clue had said. The answer, of course, had been postponement. My phone suddenly buzzed on the wooden surface. Clarissa's name lit up the display. I allowed it to ring until it stopped ringing completely. The low winter sunlight poured warmly through my windows, illuminating the exact spot in the living room where I had spent countless past evenings tallying up the exact cost of my misguided generosity. But today, that quiet felt completely different. It felt earned and entirely intentional. At 2:55 p.m., the phone lit up again. This time, a text preview appeared. Dad? Where are you? My parents are... I flipped the phone face down hard on the table and turned back to the sports page. The Tigers had lost again. Some things, I reflected, simply never change. By 3:40 p.m., the phone had rung or buzzed 6 more times. In that specific span of time, I had read every section of the paper, brewed a whole second pot of tea, and even meticulously cleaned out the chaotic junk drawer in my kitchen table. It was funny, I realized, how much you could actually accomplish when you were no longer rushing around doing errands for people who viewed you only as their indentured servant. At 3:55 p.m., the phone rang once more, but this time it was an unrecognized number. Likely her parents borrowing a stranger's phone at the airport. I ignored that one too. Through the front window, I watched my neighbor patiently untangling his Christmas lights, his small children chasing each other happily in the yard, their breath puffing out like smoke in the chilly air. A normal family enjoying a normal afternoon. No one was stranded in an airport terminal, anxiously wondering why their personal chauffeur had failed to show. By 4:15 p.m., the buzzing had become truly relentless. Clarissa, then the mystery number, then back to Clarissa again. It was like an enraged hornet slamming itself furiously against glass. I walked calmly into the kitchen, yanked the landline cord out of the wall socket, and powered down my cell phone completely. Silence. Beautiful, complete silence. I made myself a classic grilled cheese sandwich and opened a can of creamy tomato soup. Simple, satisfying comfort food I hadn't treated myself to in months because every grocery dollar had been siphoned off to sustain their illusion of wealth. The bread browned perfectly in the pan. The cheese melted into a golden ooze, and the soup steamed invitingly in my favorite mug. Outside, the sun was already dipping low, casting long, dramatic winter shadows across the backyard. Somewhere on the other side of Oak Creek, 3 very entitled people were probably arguing loudly about a huge taxi fare, fuming that their personal driver had left them completely stranded. The thought made my sandwich taste even better. By 5 p.m., I had eaten, loaded the dishwasher, and was calmly deciding on a movie. It had been years since I had enjoyed a full, quiet evening to myself without the constant, underlying fear of an emergency request or a desperate, angry plea for cash. I was just reaching for the remote control when the loud pounding began. Not polite knocking. Pounding. A furious, heavy hammering that visibly shook the door frame. I set my cup of tea aside and walked slowly toward the noise, already absolutely certain who would be waiting for me. The blows grew harder as I reached the door, each one vibrating deep into the wood. Peering through the peephole, I saw 3 figures crammed onto my small porch, their sheer anger pressed up against my house like an approaching storm front. I opened the door. Harold's face, Clarissa's father, was red and utterly furious, only inches from mine. "What in God's name is wrong with you?" he shouted, barging immediately past me into my living room without a single ounce of courtesy. "We waited at that damn airport for more than 3 hours. His wife, Eleanor, followed close behind him. Her usually carefully styled hair was a mess, and her lips were pinched into a hard line of icy disapproval. "This is completely disgraceful, Victor. Utterly disgraceful. Behavior like this from someone your age. It's barbaric." Last came Clarissa. Her designer coat was wrinkled. Her makeup was smudged, and raw fury radiated from her like heat rising off hot asphalt. "You humiliated us. Do you realize what you've done? My parents were forced to spend $55 on a cab because of you. Get out of my house." My voice cut cleanly through their shouting, sharp and absolutely final. They all froze instantly. Harold blinked hard. "Excuse me?" His face darkened rapidly from red to an angry purple. "You don't get to make demands after the reckless stunt you just pulled. Not here. This is my home," I said quietly, my feet planted firmly by the threshold. "And I want all of you out right now." Eleanor stepped forward, her words dripping with the kind of condescending superiority she had perfected over decades of sneering at people like me. "Victor, you clearly do not grasp the gravity of the consequences of what you've done. My husband has influential connections, business ties, social ties. You simply cannot treat people of our standing this way and expect." "This was a lesson," I interrupted her, holding her gaze without blinking. "A lesson about your relentless arrogance. About the despicable way you treat people you truly believe are beneath you." Clarissa's jaw dropped. "A lesson? Who do you actually think you are to lecture us? You're a nobody. You're just a... I am the man who finally stopped being your convenient bank account and your personal taxi driver." I finished for her. I stepped to the side and pushed the front door open wide. "The lesson is officially over. You may leave now." Harold jabbed a finger angrily toward my chest, but stopped just short of actually touching me. "You have absolutely no clue who you're dealing with, old man. I've been building power in this city longer than you've been breathing its air. I have people, important people, the kind who can make your life truly miserable." "Is that a threat, Mr. Jenkins?" I asked evenly. His eyes narrowed dangerously. "No, that's a promise." His voice dropped to a harsh rasp. "You think you can just abandon elderly folks at a busy airport and simply walk away without consequence? You are about to find out exactly how wrong you are." Eleanor nodded sharply, her smile as cold and hard as shattered glass. "Indeed, choices carry consequences, Victor, and yours will be very public." Clarissa pulled nervously at her father's sleeve. "Daddy, forget him. He's pathetic. He's not worth a moment of our time." They filed out slowly, like defeated soldiers retreating from a lost skirmish. But Harold turned back at the door, his glare burning straight through me. "You'll regret this," he hissed. "Count on it." I closed the door firmly behind them and threw the deadbolt with a solid click that felt final and absolute. Through the curtain, I watched them angrily pile into their large rental car, still loudly bickering as they drove off quickly into the cold winter night. The air in the house suddenly felt immensely lighter without their presence, as though their visit had left a sticky film on everything that was only now lifting away. But their final, venomous words lingered in the quiet air. Public consequences, connections, important people. I returned to the living room, lifted my mug of tea, which was still surprisingly warm. For a fleeting moment, I felt a familiar flicker of concern, but it was immediately drowned out by something much sharper, much more invigorating. anticipation. 3 days later, I was sitting at my kitchen table enjoying my morning coffee when my own grainy, old face stared back at me from the third page of the Oak Creek Daily Register. The headline, written in a dramatic font, read, "Wealthy local businessman abandons elderly couple at airport during alleged holiday storm." My hands froze instantly around the mug. There I was in a terrible, low-resolution black and white photo that had clearly been lifted from my old company's website, a picture at least 5 years out of date. Beneath it was an article that made my blood run cold, even as my long-dormant temper began to burn. Harold and Eleanor Jenkins, prominent community members visiting their daughter in Oak Creek for the holidays, were reportedly stranded at San Francisco International Airport for more than 4.5 hours on Sunday when their family member, Victor Perez, failed to arrive for a prearranged pickup. The article claimed the couple, both supposedly in their late 60s, endured the ordeal as a major winter storm warning was issued for the region. A major winter storm warning, I scoffed silently. The temperature that day had been a mild 55 degrees Fahrenheit and sunny. "We simply couldn't believe anyone would abandon us like that," Harold was quoted, his voice supposedly filled with outrage. "We called Mr. Perez repeatedly, but he completely ignored us. In the end, we had no choice but to pay for an expensive taxi in hazardous weather. At our age, being treated this way isn't just inconsiderate, it's dangerous." The piece went on, filled with hints about my so-called erratic behavior and soft whispers about my mental stability. Harold had cleverly framed himself and Eleanor as helpless, vulnerable victims of an unstable old man who had simply snapped without any warning. There was, of course, no mention whatsoever of the Christmas dinner rejection. No hint of Clarissa's outrageous demands. Not a single word about the years of financial bleeding I had endured. Just me, the villain of their story. The cruel, unstable old man who had stranded 2 innocent people in a blizzard that had never happened. I sat my coffee down and read it again. Then a third time, much slower. The byline belonged to Laura Stone, listed as the Society editor. I didn't recognize the name, but I instantly recognized the maneuver. Harold had successfully leaned on his banking network, called in significant favors, and ensured this fabricated story landed exactly where it would hurt me the most. It was, I grudgingly admitted, clever. For the first time since this entire mess began, I felt a sliver of dark respect. They weren't just spoiled, petty parasites throwing tantrums. They were calculated. They were strategic. They understood that reputation was the primary currency in a city like Oak Creek. One prominent article in the right section of the paper could instantly undo decades of meticulous work. This was no longer petty family drama. This, I realized, was open war. I folded the newspaper neatly and set it aside. My mind instantly shifted into the same mode that had built my successful construction business from nothing. Deliberate, methodical, and laser-focused. This was no longer about holiday dinners or unpaid mortgages. This was now purely about survival and ultimately victory. I opened my laptop. Harold Jenkins, Eleanor Jenkins, Clarissa Perez. One by one, I typed their names into search engines, pulling up every profile, every published photo, every detail of their sprawling digital footprint, their connections, their habits, their profound weaknesses. Every careless detail they had ever left lying around online instantly became ammunition. If they wanted to play chess, I would show them what a real player looked like. I glanced at the wall calendar. December 18th. 7 days until Christmas. 7 days to meticulously design a lesson they would never, ever forget. For the next 3 days, I lived in a completely different mental state. Not as Victor Perez, the washed-up, dismissed old man my family had carelessly thrown aside, but as Victor Perez, the shrewd businessman, the careful strategist, the hardened survivor who had clawed his way up once and was entirely capable of doing it again. The laptop became my entire war room. Browser tabs spread wide across the screen like cards in a high-stakes poker game. Harold Jenkins, retired senior manager of Western Reserve Bank, treasurer of the Mid-Coast Business Guild, a long-time, esteemed member of the exclusive Magnolia Golf Club. A man who had constructed his entire identity on a foundation of trust and influence. A man with an immaculate reputation to protect, and consequently a great deal to lose. Eleanor's Instagram profile told its own meticulously polished story. Photos of charity luncheon tables, curated wine-tasting events, glossy vacation snapshots along Lake Tahoe tagged with #BlessedLife. Every single picture was staged to radiate refinement. Every caption was expertly engineered to draw fawning compliments. Friends lined up in the comments section, praising her impeccable taste and her inspirational lifestyle. All of it, I knew, was funded by other people's wallets, including mine. Clarissa's Facebook page was even more revealing. Photos captioned our beautiful home with the expensive, custom kitchen I had paid for prominently in the background. Check-ins at overly priced, trendy restaurants during the very months when I was desperately covering their critical utility bills. One status update from just the previous week caught my eye. So excited for Christmas dinner with family. Can't wait to show off our hosting skills. Our hosting skills. Our home. Our success. The sheer narcissism was staggering. But it was Marcus's LinkedIn activity that ultimately tied the whole nasty bow. His recent activity showed one brand new connection. Laura Stone, society editor at the Oak Creek Daily Register. The exact same Laura Stone who had written the malicious hit piece, dragging my name so carelessly through the dirt. I leaned back slowly in my chair, staring at the constellation of tabs open across my screen. They had made 3 catastrophic mistakes. First, they had utterly underestimated me. Second, they had been the ones to go public with their attack, which gave me full moral permission to go public with my complete answer. Third, they had meticulously chronicled their entire privileged, hypocritical existence online, handing me a perfect, searchable archive of their hypocrisy. I clicked on Laura Stone's profile. 44 years old. Journalism degree from Berkeley. 16 years at various small local papers. No background in banking or high finance. This meant Harold had actively sought her out, most likely through one of his old business contacts. A quick search through Oak Creek's business directories confirmed it. There were several mutual connections between Harold Jenkins and Laura's editor. The smear piece hadn't been a random act of fate. It had been planted deliberately, carefully, but it was still amateur work. I opened a blank document. Not to write a flimsy rebuttal to their blatant lies, but for something far, far better. A weapon. I began building an irrefutable timeline. 5 years of concrete proof. Bank statements, detailed receipts, canceled checks. The initial down payment for their house, $50,000 pulled directly from my home equity loan. The extensive kitchen renovation when Clarissa demanded quartz counters, $20,000 charged straight onto my personal credit card. 60 consecutive mortgage payments at $3,500 apiece, $210,000. $250,000 and counting. And I had every single shred of it documented in writing. In the last 10 years, I had given away more of myself than I ever thought possible. So when my phone buzzed with a text from yet another unfamiliar number, almost certainly Clarissa attempting another flimsy trick, I ignored it completely and kept working. By nightfall, I had compiled a manila folder so thick it was heavy. Inside were the bank statements, the receipts, and even photographs pulled directly from their own social media accounts. Every shiny, expensive purchase they had proudly paraded online, all paid for with my money. Tucked in on the top of the stack was a printed copy of the newspaper article itself. My red pen scribbles were clearly visible in the margins. Lie next to Harold's dramatic storm story, false beside the claim of my erratic behavior, and missing context written where they had conveniently erased 5 long years of my financial support. On the wall calendar, December 24th was circled boldly. Not for the holiday, but because it was the absolutely perfect date for my personal justice. According to a Facebook event Clarissa had foolishly posted, they were hosting a formal Christmas dinner for 12 friends, neighbors, and people from their exclusive social circle. The very kind of audience who believed every single word printed in the Oak Creek Daily Register. They would hear the truth tonight. I shut the laptop with a decisive snap and reached for my old camera, the heavy-duty model I'd once used to document construction projects for my business. Tomorrow it would serve another, far more satisfying purpose, recording evidence of a very different kind. Christmas Eve morning arrived, gray and bitter, typical of a Sacramento winter day. I reflected grimly that I was not welcome at any family table, but that was fine because I had plans of my own. I meticulously laid out my evidence as if I were a prosecutor preparing for a complex trial. The bank statements were sorted by year, with all the mortgage payments highlighted in bright yellow. Receipts were stacked neatly in order, clearly showing how my money had directly fueled their lavish lifestyle. I included printed photographs of Clarissa's jewelry, their expensive vacations, and even the excessive Christmas decorations that were now hanging in the very house I had kept financially afloat. I made 14 identical packets, one for every expected guest. The defamatory newspaper article went on the top of each stack, with my clear red pen notes visible. Lie next to Harold's dramatic storm story, false beside the claim of my erratic behavior, and missing context written clearly where they had conveniently omitted 5 years of my devoted financial support. Then, I dressed for the serious occasion. My best navy suit, the one I had worn to Sophia's funeral years ago. Tonight, I thought it wasn't a funeral for her. It was a definitive farewell to the weak man I had allowed myself to become, the man who had let himself be completely walked over. Tonight, I was someone different, someone who commanded and demanded respect. At 6:45 p.m., I slid the heavy packets into my dark briefcase and drove the short distance to Brookside Heights. Their magnificent house glowed warmly like a picture postcard. Cars were jammed tightly into the driveway and spilled out along the entire street. Through the large windows, I could clearly see the silhouettes of people gathered around the dining table. Clarissa was laughing heartily, performing the role of the perfect, gracious hostess in the home my money had ultimately built. I parked my truck across the street and checked my watch. 7 p.m. Exactly right. Dinner would be underway. The main course would be served. There would be no convenient escape route for them. The front door, predictably, was unlocked. Of course it was. Clarissa always openly boasted about how safe and exclusive their neighborhood was. Unlike the places where I had grown up, I stepped quietly inside. The warmth of the house hit my face, immediately accompanied by the sound of loud laughter and clinking glasses. But darling, that simply isn't how our family does things. Eleanor's superior voice floated clearly from the dining room, followed by a ripple of polite laughter. Our family. The same family they had worked so tirelessly to keep me out of. I walked confidently into the dining room, my briefcase firmly in hand. 12 heads immediately turned in unison. Conversations froze mid-sentence. Clarissa's wine glass stopped halfway to her lips. Marcus went visibly pale. Harold and Eleanor looked instantly as though they had just seen a ghost. "Good evening," I said calmly, setting my briefcase gently down on the marble sideboard. "I sincerely hope you don't mind if I join you for Christmas." Clarissa snapped out of her shock first. "Victor, this is completely inappropriate. You need to leave now." "Actually," I corrected her, opening my briefcase and pulling out the first stack of folders. "I think your esteemed guests deserve to know who really paid for this celebration. This house, this dinner, this entire lifestyle you've all been so proudly showing off." A woman I didn't recognize, likely one of Eleanor's charity friends, leaned forward with avid curiosity. "What does he mean, Clarissa?" "He's having some kind of episode," Clarissa said quickly, waving her hand dismissively. "Marcus, call someone." But I was already moving around the table, placing an identical packet of documents in front of each astonished person. "Here are the bank records," I said conversationally, as if I were merely discussing the weather. 5 full years of continuous financial support. $168,000 in mortgage payments alone, plus the initial down payment, renovations, all the furniture, new appliances. Absolutely everything you see around you. The room instantly fell into a stunned, deathly silence, broken only by the sharp sound of papers rustling. 12 pairs of eyes scanned the detailed documents. Their faces shifted rapidly, surprise melting first into disbelief, and then into something else entirely. A mix of recognition and shame. "This is," one man began, then stopped, staring intently at the highlighted numbers. Outrageous! A woman seated across from him finished sharply. Clarissa, why on earth didn't you tell us any of this? Clarissa's perfect hostess mask was visibly cracking. It's far more complicated than it looks. Victor offered to help us. We never actually asked. Actually, I cut in, smoothly sliding the folded newspaper article onto the table. Let's talk a little about what you did ask for, and what you subsequently told the media about me. The air in the room seemed to chill dramatically. I handed out copies of the published article, watching as the dinner guests recognized the unflattering photo of me that had been splashed across page 3 just days before. Now, I said, my voice steady and deliberate, let's discuss the real manipulators in this family. Harold's complexion drained rapidly from deep red to a sickly pale gray. Eleanor sat absolutely stiff, her wine glass hanging forgotten in her rigid hand. Mr. Jenkins here, I continued, tapping the article with authority, used his old banking connections to deliberately plant this false story. Notice how I'm cast as unstable and dangerous. A cruel old man who abandoned helpless seniors in freezing weather. A gray-haired man in a tailored sweater glanced up from the printout. Harold, what exactly is going on here? The weather that day was 55 degrees Fahrenheit and sunny. I answered firmly before Harold could even open his mouth. 66. And they weren't stranded tourists. 67. They were Clarissa's parents. Headed to a Christmas dinner I was expressly forbidden to attend because I wasn't good enough. Eleanor stammered weakly. That's not. We never said. You never said what, Eleanor? I challenged, holding up my phone, scrolling through the saved screenshots of Clarissa's old posts. That my food was too low-class for your parents? That my Mexican cooking and my blue-collar conversation would embarrass you in front of your educated friends? One of Eleanor's charity companions shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Eleanor, surely you didn't. He's twisting things, Harold blurted out desperately, but his voice completely wavered. This man is unstable. He's under severe stress. Financial problems. Financial problems? I nearly laughed out loud. I've been handing your daughter and son-in-law nearly $3,000 every single month for 5 years. The only financial problems in this room are the ones you're all about to face. I turned to address the entire shocked table. These people have bled me dry for over $250,000 while simultaneously insulting me, while actively poisoning my own son against me. And when I finally stood up and said no, they tried to viciously smear me in the newspaper. Marcus finally spoke up, his voice paper-thin. Dad, I swear I didn't know anything about the newspaper article. Your wife knew, I said evenly. Her parents set it up. They made me into a villain simply because I refused to be their chauffeur and their bank any longer. I could sense the mood shifting powerfully, like tectonic plates grinding under the surface. Faces around the table hardened as the terrible truth began to settle in. This is utterly disgraceful, said an elderly woman in pearls, staring down at the highlighted bank statements. Harold, how could you possibly let your daughter exploit this man's kindness, and then drag his good name through the mud when he simply stopped? Harold tried desperately to regain control. You don't understand the whole picture. I understand perfectly, she snapped back. He supported your family while you treated him like a servant. And when he stopped, you shamelessly tried to destroy him. Eleanor's voice broke in a sob. He abandoned us at the airport. After you told me I wasn't welcome at Christmas dinner, I stated calmly. After 5 years of paying your bills, while you sneered at my background and my education. Silence fell heavy as stone. 12 pairs of eyes were fixed on Harold and Eleanor, now filled with disgust, pity, and profound shame. Clarissa attempted one last, desperate gambit. Everyone, please, this is a private family matter. No. My voice cut clean through the air. This stopped being private when you dragged me through the newspaper, when you decided my reputation was acceptable collateral for your arrogance. I wanted every single person here to know the real truth before they read about me again, because they will read about me again. But next time, it will be the real story. I closed my briefcase with a loud snap and straightened my tie. Enjoy the rest of your dinner, I concluded. It's the very last one I will ever pay for. I walked confidently toward the door as the room behind me erupted. Voices rose in volume, questions fired rapidly, and their perfect, fragile facade collapsed completely under its own massive weight. To me, it sounded like the sweetest Christmas music I had ever heard. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in March, sent by certified mail, requiring my signature. I signed for it right on my porch, the mild spring air carrying the fresh scent of new beginnings instead of the cold, gnawing desperation of December. Inside the envelope was a notice of default. The numbers laid out inside the document told the clear, unambiguous story. 3 consecutive months of unpaid mortgage payments had finally caught up with Marcus and Clarissa. $10,500 past due. They had 14 days to make the payment current or face immediate foreclosure on the very house I had painstakingly helped them purchase. I set the letter aside on the table and calmly sipped my coffee, reading it the way you would read about a distant storm on the other side of the country. Interesting, but no longer my problem. My phone had been buzzing constantly for weeks with increasingly desperate calls. Clarissa's number was immediately blocked after her first shrieking, venomous voicemail. Harold and Eleanor, whose high social standing in Oak Creek had utterly evaporated like morning mist after the devastating Christmas dinner fiasco, were calling from various restricted lines. And then there was Marcus, my son. I had ignored his calls as well, half out of lingering anger, and half to see exactly how long it would take for him to finally choke down his considerable pride. The answer, I found, was precisely 100 days. It was a Thursday evening when I heard the hesitant knock on my door. Marcus stood on my porch, but he was not the polished, arrogant man who had once informed me I wasn't welcome at his holiday table. He was worn down, looking years older than he should have. Dark circles hollowed his eyes. His usually tailored suit was rumpled and creased, his skin the gray color of exhaustion. Desperation clung to him heavily, like cheap, unwelcome cologne. "Dad," he said softly when I opened the door. "We really need to talk." I stepped aside, allowing him entry. He walked in slowly, looking around my home as if he were seeing it for the very first time. He noticed the new, comfortable furniture I'd bought with my very first mortgage-free paycheck. He saw the freshly painted walls I'd neglected for 8 years. He observed the small, necessary repairs I'd finally managed to make once I stopped bankrolling his extravagant lifestyle. "Nice place," he muttered, his voice sounding hollow. "That's what happens when you spend your money on yourself instead of on people who don't appreciate it," I said simply, settling into my favorite recliner. "Coffee?" He shook his head slowly and perched awkwardly on the edge of my couch, like a nervous guest who wasn't sure he was truly welcome. "Dad," he began, his voice heavy with sincerity, "I need you to know how deeply sorry I am. For Christmas. For the disgusting article. For the way Clarissa and we treated you. Go on. I honestly didn't know Harold planted that story. I swear." He dragged his hands nervously through his hair. "When I found out, Jesus, Dad, the things they said about you, the way they talked about our family, about Mom." My jaw clenched tight, but I kept my voice even and low. "And what, precisely, did they say about your mother?" His shoulders slumped completely. "That she knew her place better than you. That she understood boundaries." He couldn't bring himself to look at me. "I should have defended you. I should have stood up to them years ago." "Yes," I said simply. "You should have." Silence stretched out between us. Outside, I heard the faint, regular sound of a neighbor mowing their lawn. The sound of an ordinary, peaceful evening in an ordinary neighborhood. The kind of life where sons didn't casually exile their own fathers from holidays. "The house is officially in foreclosure," Marcus admitted finally, his voice barely a whisper. "I know. We simply can't make the payments without." He stopped himself, unable to finish the thought. "Without my help," I finished for him, my tone dry. "Without the money I bled into that house while your wife's family treated me like dirt." He swallowed hard. "I know how bad it looks. Marcus." I leaned forward until he was forced to meet my eyes. Do you truly know how much I gave you over 5 years? He nodded miserably. Clarissa added it all up after Christmas. The mortgage, the down payment, everything. Over $200,000. $250,000. I corrected him precisely. I know the exact number because I finally forced myself to do what I should have done years ago. Add it all up. His face crumpled instantly. Dad, I am so sorry. I truly don't know how to fix this. You can't fix it, I said honestly. That money is gone. But worse than that, the years are gone. Years we could have spent building a healthy relationship. Instead, I was underwriting your wife's little fantasy. I know, he whispered. Then, after a long, difficult pause, but maybe we could start over. Find a way back. Are you asking me to resume the mortgage payments? The last shred of hope drained completely from his face. We're going to lose everything, Dad. The house, Clarissa's respect, her parents' approval. I don't know what I'll do. You'll figure it out, I said, not cruelly, but simply stating a hard, unavoidable truth. The same way I figured out how to live without a son who respected me. The way I learned to spend my Christmases alone while you laughed with people who genuinely thought I was beneath them. Tears welled in his eyes, silent and quiet, like a man who had finally run out of all choices. I lost you, didn't I? I chose them over you, and now I've lost you forever. I studied him for a long moment. This was my son, the boy I'd raised, the man I'd sacrificed everything for, who had permitted his wife's family to convince him that his own father wasn't worthy of his blood. No, Marcus, I said at last, my voice firm. You didn't lose me. You gave me away. There's a crucial difference. He wiped quickly at his face. Is there any chance? Any way you could ever forgive me? I forgave you months ago, I said, and I knew I meant it. But forgiveness isn't pretending nothing bad ever happened. It isn't me resuming those payments. It isn't going back to accepting scraps of attention at someone else's table. Then what does it mean? I stood up and walked toward the mantel. Sophia's photo smiled gently back at me, and beside it, I had placed a new picture. Me at Easter with Elena and her family. The first truly joyful holiday I'd spent with people who genuinely wanted me there. It means if you want a relationship with me, you start entirely from the ground up, I explained. It means showing me genuine respect, not demanding that I earn it again. It means making your choices because they are right, not because they are easy. And it means the next time your wife or anyone else tries to push me out of a family gathering, you will finally remember who actually acts like family. He nodded slowly, something subtle shifting in his eyes. Maybe, just maybe, for the first time he understood that respect is not inherited, it is chosen and earned. The house, he asked quietly, is not my problem anymore? I confirmed. I sat back down in my chair, feeling a profound sense of lightness. You're a grown man, Marcus. It's time to start acting like one. Find work that actually pays your bills. Sell the house if you have to. Buy something you can truly afford. Stop expecting other people to bankroll your mistakes. He stood up slowly, his shoulders straighter than when he had first walked in. For the first time all night, he looked less like a pathetic boy begging for rescue and more like a man finally facing his own grave consequences. You're right, he said quietly. About all of it. I know. At the door, he paused and looked back. Dad, for what it's worth, when you finally stood up for yourself at Christmas dinner, I was proud, embarrassed and furious. Sure, but proud too. Good, I replied. Maybe there's still some hope for you after all. After Marcus left, I poured a generous glass of the good scotch and stepped quietly onto the back porch. Spring was truly stirring in Oak Creek. There were fresh buds visible on the trees, and the air was warming with a clear, beautiful promise. In 5 short months, I would be turning 64. Sophia had been gone for 8 years now. I realized, with a heavy heart, that I had tragically wasted 5 of those precious years breaking myself in half for people who fundamentally mistook sacrifice for servitude. Not anymore. My phone buzzed softly. A text message from Elena. Dinner Sunday. The kids want to show you their school projects. I smiled genuinely as I typed back. Wouldn't miss it. Real family, I had learned, is not automatically bound by blood or by last names. It is comprised of the people who actively want you at their table, not the ones who merely tolerate your presence while eagerly spending your money. Everything else, those formal dinners, that extravagant house, their ridiculous social standing, had been nothing more than expensive, elaborate theater. And I was finally done buying tickets to plays where I wasn't even welcome on the stage. The scotch burned warm and satisfyingly on my tongue, tasted like freedom, and the future, for the first time in a very long time, looked exactly as bright as I was finally willing to make it. The weeks that followed brought significant change, not just for me, but clearly for Marcus and Clarissa as well. Clarissa's social life, built entirely on appearances and her parents' questionable standing, completely crumbled. The wealthy friends who had gathered for the Christmas Eve dinner quickly distanced themselves, unwilling to associate with the kind of financial exploitation and public deceit I had exposed. Harold and Eleanor, now facing a severe loss of reputation and influence in their own social circles, packed up and returned to their home, the Malibu. Their retreat was not quiet. They blamed Marcus for failing to control me, adding another layer of tension to his already collapsing marriage. Marcus, however, began to show the small, fragile signs of the man he was supposed to be. He had finally been forced to confront the wreckage he and his wife had created, realizing that his father's money had simply shielded him from reality. He started seriously looking for new work, one that actually utilized his skills and paid his bills, rather than waiting for a handout. One Saturday morning, I woke up early and started working on my own house. I repaired the cracked concrete driveway and finally fixed the flickering porch light. Simple things, yet they symbolized years of neglect caused by channeling my resources toward someone else's superficial dream. Later that month, I went to visit Elena and her family, the ones I referred to earlier. Elena was my niece, Sophia's sister's daughter, whom I hadn't connected with deeply in years due to my focus on Marcus's needs. Now, her home was filled with genuine warmth, laughter, and an unconditional welcome that felt restorative. Her children, Mia and Javier, didn't care about the size of my bank account or my class. They just wanted to share their school projects. This was the simple, authentic joy I had sacrificed. The phone calls from Marcus became less frequent and less frantic. They were no longer desperate pleas for money or assistance, but rather brief, uncertain attempts to initiate a conversation, a genuine connection. The foreclosure process on his house moved forward slowly but inevitably. The house, with its expensive, custom renovations and quartz countertops, was scheduled for auction in late May. I knew he was suffering, but I also knew that this consequence was the only true path to his liberation. He needed to hit rock bottom to finally learn self-reliance. One evening, I watched the local news. There was a brief segment about a new community center being built for underprivileged families in the area. I thought about the construction business I had successfully built, the jobs I had provided, and the fact that I finally had financial security back. I still had resources, not enough to be a bottomless bank, but enough to help in ways that were meaningful and honorable. The truth was, the anger had mostly passed. I had already achieved the ultimate victory: self-respect. I was no longer the fool, the mark, the silent benefactor. I was Victor Perez, the survivor, the man who had reclaimed his own life. It was the first week of May when Marcus called again. His voice sounded thin, but for the first time, it was entirely devoid of any demanding expectation. "Dad, I just wanted to let you know that the house sold today," he said. It was a short sale, just enough to cover the remaining loan and the bank's fees. We walked away with nothing. I listened silently, letting the magnitude of the statement settle in the air. "Clarissa, she's gone," he admitted. "She moved back in with her parents in California. She said she couldn't live here without the lifestyle she was used to." I didn't feel triumph, only a quiet, profound sadness for the marriage that had been built on such shallow ground. "I'm sorry, Marcus," I said, and it was a true apology for his pain, not for my actions. "Don't be," he replied, a strange, rough laugh escaping him. She took the new car, the designer bags, and all the debt. And I took my integrity, I guess. It's funny. The things you realize are worthless when you have nothing left. What are you going to do now? I found a small apartment near my new job. It's not much, but it's mine. I'm working 2 jobs to catch up. For the first time, the money I earn actually stays in my account. Feels clean. I smiled. This was the son I had missed for years. That's good, Marcus. That's very good. He hesitated for a moment, then spoke the words I had been waiting a long time to hear. I know I have no right to ask this, but I'm spending my first free Sunday with Elena's family this weekend. She invited me. I was wondering if you were going to be there. This was not a request for money, a demand for comfort, or an attempt to bypass his consequences. It was a simple question about my presence, acknowledging that I had a life and family separate from him, and that he wanted to be a part of it. I will be there, Marcus, I confirmed. Okay, he said simply. I'll see you then. And Dad, thank you for everything, even the hard lessons. The conversation ended, and I felt a weight lift that I hadn't realized I was still carrying. My original plan, canceling the mortgage and exposing the Jenkinses, had been about justice and revenge. But the true, unexpected victory was the possibility of reclaiming my son, not as a parasite, but as an adult seeking connection. The Sunday arrived, bright and warm. I drove to Elena's modest but bustling home, which was full of the smells of good, simple food and the chaos of children. Elena's husband, Carlos, met me at the door with a genuine, firm handshake. Welcome, Tio Victor, he said. Marcus is already out back helping me with the grill. I walked through the house, pausing to watch Mia and Javier arguing playfully over a board game. I recognized that kind of simple, loud, beautiful family noise. Outside, Marcus looked up from the grill. He was wearing an old, faded t-shirt, not a tailored suit, and he looked tired, but his eyes were clearer than I had seen them in years. Dad, he said, offering a hand that was smudged with charcoal. I took his hand. Son, you remembered how to operate a grill. I see. He gave a small, genuine smile. I'm learning how to do a lot of things again. We stood side by side, flipping burgers, talking about the local football team, the simple, ordinary topics we hadn't touched in years, topics that had no connection to granite countertops or luxury holidays. Elena and Sophia's sister, Clara, brought out platters of food. Javier ran up to me, pulling my sleeve. Tio Victor, come see my solar system project. I built it myself. I followed the child, feeling the warmth of hands on my arm and the genuine, unconditional welcome. This was not a dinner based on a hidden agenda or financial exploitation. This was family, in its simplest, purest form. Marcus watched me from the grill, and in his eyes, I saw not guilt, but understanding. He understood that this table, this life, was the real inheritance, and it couldn't be bought. It was a quiet evening several months later. Marcus was living in his small, self-funded apartment, steadily working his 2 jobs, and rebuilding his life with quiet dedication. Clarissa had filed for divorce from afar, a process that felt mercifully quick and final. Harold and Eleanor had vanished completely from the local society pages, their reputation too badly damaged to mend. My justice was complete. I was sitting in my living room, the space bright and welcoming, no longer shadowed by anxiety about debt or obligation. I realized I had not checked my bank balance with worry in 6 months. The money I earned was secure and my own. The phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number, but I answered it. Victor Perez, please. The voice was sharp, professional, and slightly familiar. This is he. Mr. Perez, this is Mr. Henderson, senior partner at Mid-Coast Business Guild. I'm calling because we had a vacancy for treasurer, and given the rather public events of last December, we feel we need someone with impeccable financial transparency and, frankly, a proven strength of character. We've heard the stories, Mr. Perez, the real stories from several people at that dinner, and they align perfectly with the documents you distributed. We realize you built your business from the ground up, and you're a man who holds people accountable. We'd like to offer you the position. It pays well, and frankly, we need your kind of integrity. I leaned back in my chair, a slow smile spreading across my face. Harold's old position. The circle was complete. The public consequences he had threatened had swung back and destroyed him, only to elevate me. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Henderson," I said. "Let's set up a meeting next week." I hung up, feeling a powerful sense of confirmation. I hadn't sought revenge. I had merely shown the truth, and the world had corrected itself. Later that week, Marcus stopped by for an unscheduled visit. He wasn't begging for anything. He just wanted to talk. He was leaving for a small family dinner at Elena's, but he came to mine first. "I sold my wedding band today," he confessed, holding up his bare finger. "Paid off the last of a credit card I used for Clarissa's graduation trip." "Good for you, son," I said. He looked around my simple, quiet house, and his eyes landed on the picture of Sophia on the mantel. "I remember the smell of her cooking," he murmured. "And I remember you working every Saturday, driving that old truck, just so I could have nice things." "I did it for love," I said simply. "But love can be foolish if it becomes servitude." "I won't make that mistake again," he promised. "I understand the difference now." He paused, looking at me, truly looking at me, perhaps for the first time as a man, not as a provider or an enemy. "I'm proud to be your son, Dad." The man who stood up and told the truth, even when it cost him everything. "It didn't cost me everything, Marcus," I countered gently. "It cost me only what was fake." He nodded, a genuine, deep understanding in his eyes. He gave me a brief, heartfelt hug, something we hadn't shared in almost a decade, and then he walked out the door. He was headed to a dinner where he would be unconditionally welcomed, a dinner he was paying for with his own effort, a life he was building on his own terms. I stood there for a long moment, listening to the quiet of my home. The silence was not empty. It was full of peace, self-respect, and the slow, sure rhythm of a life finally lived for myself. I walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and admired the way the setting sun streamed through my clean windows, hitting the freshly painted wall. The entire episode, the Christmas exclusion, the payments, the scandal, the collapse. It had all been a painful but necessary cleansing. I had bought my freedom with $250,000 and a moment of courage. It was the best investment I had ever made.